Hello and welcome to this edition of Take Another Look, GOV-TV's Eye on Public Art in Albuquerque. Today's show is going to be a little different. Instead of focusing on public art per se, we'll look at how art, culture, and creativity can transform communities through a process known as creative placemaking. We'll also discuss an upcoming regional conference on creative placemaking coming to Albuquerque in February. To enlighten us on these matters, my guests today are Sherri Brueggemann, manager of the city's public art program, and Cristina Rogers, a consultant on creative placemaking. Thank you both for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Tony.
Yeah, so I'm sure most people watching this have no idea what creative placemaking is. So, and I've read a lot of different descriptions of it, but what does it mean to you, Sherri? And how does it going to relate to the average person?
Well, there's sort of an official way of describing creative placemaking, and I can read a little blurb here that says it's an evolving field of practice that intentionally leverages the power of the arts, culture, and creativity to serve a community's interest while driving a broader agenda for change, growth, and transformation in a way that builds character and quality of place. So it's about authenticity. The way I like to think about it is just sort of our innate human desire to want to make places that we want to be in and that we can relate to and that we can understand. And whether it's from, very early human times of identifying spaces that are safe for us or that we can build a community in and around and be habitable, like a cave, or our desire to look into outer space and name the stars and imagine what it might be like living on the moon or another planet and envision what it might be like for a human being to inhabit that kind of a space.
Yeah, like Elon Musk.
Yes, he's definitely creative placemaking in outer space, which we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah, okay. Cristina, what's your take on it?
So the only thing I would add to that, because I think Sherri really encapsulated it perfectly, is also using arts and culture kind of as the medium for the community itself and the public to be able to communicate how they would like the spaces to be, and sort of, especially now when administrations are so formalized. While we were deciding how to live in ancient times, there wasn't always such a powerful administration. So I think that it helps us communicate with each other.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now we had talked before, and you said this field of creative placemaking was sort of spurred by the last recession. Could you talk a little bit about that?
That's right. So I think it's a combination of things. I think that was a big blow, the crash. So the federal government was trying to work in more efficient ways and sort of have more interagency cooperation and attack problems that way. And then also people just couldn't move anymore. Before, you used to be able to find another job in another town, or there was some opportunity outside of where you lived, and it became a situation where people couldn't get out of their houses, and there wasn't an opportunity elsewhere. So the safest thing to do is stay where you were, especially if you're surrounded by family. So people started improving the places that they lived rather than seek improved opportunities elsewhere.
Yeah. And the actual term came from the NEA, is that right?
It did.
Well, there's a little bit.
It did and it
there's
didn't.
a little debate about that. There was actually a book published in the early 1980s called Creative Placemakers, which was a beautiful sort of coffee table book that really showcased the role of public art in bringing out stories and identities in communities through artists.
Right.
But yes, in 2010, when the National Endowment for the Arts commissioned this snazzy little report about sort of how the government agencies could work better together and also across governments, local government, state government, lots of different disciplines, architecture, planning, code enforcement, all kinds of things like that. Ann Markison and Gadwa were the consultants that wrote the book and were given credit with coining the phrase creative placemaking as a process rather than sort of a result or an outcome.
Right.
I didn't know about that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's cool.
Well,
Sherri always surprises me.
I want to talk about how this process is a little different from what we think of as a typical planning process, an urban planning process, or just a city planning process. Who all is typically involved in this process?
Well, it can take different forms, but I think the main thing is kind of flipping the script. So the community's involved from the beginning and deciding what it is they want done and how that might look, rather than, say, an administration deciding or
Hiring a consultant.
hiring a consultant and saying, okay, we want to do X, Y, and Z, come up with some design proposals, and then go to the public. And then we kind of start our conversations then. So this sort of flips the script and starts at the beginning and talks to the community.
So it's more of a grassroots thing in that sense,
Yes.
but it still involves policymakers and
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Lots of different disciplinary fields of urban design, architecture, transportation might be included because of public transportation. Other kinds of utilities, like in New Mexico, where we have the Water Utility Authority and the AMAFCA, the Flood Control Authority. Having a lot of control over the way our spaces are designed and built so that we're protecting people's assets.
Yeah, and that's one thing I like to remind people. So the creative and creative placemaking doesn't necessarily always mean just the artists, although they're an important factor, but it's helping a community be more creative in addressing their challenges or in answering questions.
And collaborative.
Yeah.
Getting everybody in the same rooms together to collaborate on a creative, brainstorming.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed in sort of reading about some of this, it also, one of the chief aims of creative placemaking is to give voice to people in communities that typically don't have a say in how their communities are shaped. And what they mentioned specifically was low income neighborhoods, communities of color, immigrants, that type of stuff, people who aren't usually part of that process. Is that what it was intended to do?
Well, again, I think it goes back to what Cristina was talking about, that, at a certain point in our economic history, being able to leave and go to another space and create a space for yourself became less of an option. And so having a voice to talk about how to improve one's neighborhood or surroundings or resources or amenities was definitely a major part of this.
Yeah, actually, I live in Morelos, and we were just having a conversation about murals, and we were talking about the murals in Chicano Park and in the Mission District in San Francisco. Just examples of people in a community wanting to make their community more beautiful and reflect who they are in ways that were very accessible for them.
And especially in ways that they hadn't, those communities have not been asked to participate in the past.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Sherri, public art has always sort of embraced the concept of working with the public, and it's gotten even, I think, more pronounced as the program has gone on. This creative placemaking process seems to take that a step further in that it doesn't, as you said, doesn't just address the creative community, art or murals or that type of thing, but it gets into a whole other range of issues. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the public art process that we've, basically used for the past 40 years is that we go to the community and do some envisioning and identify where and how the public art would be developed, and then artists are asked to respond to that. With creative placemaking, there's much more of a fusion together of artist and community so that the work isn't done separately, one step before the other. It's kind of all done at the same time. So artists might be not even solicited from outside. They're often artists that are residing right in the very community that is seeking to make improvements or change.
Okay. And Cristina, we talked, before, but it can involve transportation issues, immigration issues. It's not just the look per se of the space, but it's all the other things that make up a community. You've had some experience working in that realm before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the main thing is that it's a process. Like Sherri was saying, it's not just an outcome of what something looks like, or even, let's say, a mural. It's actually the process and working with the community, because one of the goals is to strengthen the community, to increase the bonds between people, to work on something so that future challenges are easier, like basically we have practice meeting those challenges and addressing them. So sure, I've worked on a few projects. I think the one that you're talking about is Gallup, though.
Well, I wanted to ask you first about the two-way street project, because that was at the very basic economic development kind of thing, which is another issue that can be taken up in this process. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened with that?
I think you're talking about Second and Silver, possibly. Or are you talking about Two-Way Street, the newspaper?
The newspaper.
Oh,
Right,
okay,
right,
that is, so that was a project, I'm not actually that involved with that. I do work with them a lot because I'm huge fans of their work. That was a master's project that Jeff Hertz, who actually works with City Council, came up with.
Okay.
And they are tackling a range of issues and doing all kinds of wonderful work. One of the things that they're working on is the economic development continuum, and sort of a continuum of commerce, and making it more accessible to more people. Starting kind of trying to meet them where they're at and finding maybe what barriers of entry there are for people to kind of enter the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for, going back to creative placemaking itself as a process, it's a great opportunity to integrate not just public art in the terms of the visual arts, but literary skills, performing arts skills, poetry, slam poetry, all those other kinds of creative artistic skills that can be brought into a process so that creative individuals within their community have that sort of continuum of being able to see how to apply their creative skills for economic improvement.
Right. They're working on pop-ups. So they worked on the Bricklight Nights. They were co-coordinators for that, and helping people kind of get business licenses and learn how to do things. And
yeah, and starting with the folks who need this help the most, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Well, tell me, you also were working on something called the Cole Avenue Commons Project in Gallup. Tell me how that process worked, what that was about.
So the community of Gallup had been working as a community trying to figure out what they wanted to do. So they'd done like a metropolitan redevelopment plan and a few other things. And in the course of that work, they came up with a wish list of things that they wanted to see in the future. So number one was a library, but number two was the redesign of their main street, which is Cole Avenue Commons, to revitalize their downtown. So, I was part of the design team that worked on that, and it's been really incredible. So we just finished the design the whole public engagement process, which involved the regular focus groups, but also meeting people at their monthly arts crawl. So we had a table, and people were able to give their input and tell us what they would like to see, and then we had a series more of meetings, and they've come to almost a unanimous consensus on their design, which is very cool. And the city council has approved it, and now they're just seeking funding. But that's a good example of the process. So the conversations continue, and for instance, now we're talking about ways to mitigate the construction. So when things slow down and they're under construction, we're talking about really cool creative ways that we can keep traffic going there.
Okay. And again, getting back to Sherri's previous point, it's artists that seem to be the glue that holds this thing together. All these other people are involved in it, including the community and the public policy people. But I know I read over the website a little bit, and you had artists doing all kinds of stuff, setting up little temporary displays and things to get people interested in this process. How important was it to have the artistic community be part of this?
Well, it was essential, and so this is a good moment for me to remind, to introduce the arts organizations into this conversation. Because the thing is, so the arts organizations are they have fans, they're used to bringing people out for huge events all the time. And so the thing about getting the community involved is not that many people will go to a meeting but like 1,000 people will go to an arts crawl. So that's the best place to have the conversation with him.
There you go.
It's actually a really amazing and beautiful recognition of the power of the arts to engage people and to draw people in, because like she said, I mean, how many people really want to show up to a community planning meeting? But if there's some entertainment, activity, engagement, creative, opportunities, then people are more inclined to show up and be part of the process.
As someone who spent many, many hours of my life in planning meetings, I really wish there would have been an alternative. But well, so now, one of the key things about this whole process is the interaction of the various stakeholders, again, with the public policymakers. That seems to be the difference in this process. There's no layers between them. You're putting them right together. And that seems to be one of the key things about this whole process. You're putting them together in a way that things can actually get implemented, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the city of Albuquerque, through an NEA grant, did some work with a couple of different organizations who brought in artists in the international district. And the artists really became sort of the leaders and the facilitators of the process. And the citizens and the policymakers and the funders and the other decision makers really all sort of were at the same level, so there wasn't a hierarchical sort of like top down, this is what you can or can't do. It just really broke down those kinds of structures so that everyone was forced to draw their favorite sort of vision of what a library would look like. And when everybody's forced to draw, and you might not be an artist, it absolutely breaks down some of that sort of tension.
Yeah.
And the barriers of language, too. So everybody's kind of communicating in terms that everyone understands, because every discipline has its lingo, and not everyone knows what those specific things are. So then I think when you break down those language barriers, then everybody can kind of start to see what everybody else is talking about.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, both of you, I think we touched upon it in our previous conversations. You make a place popular, you start bringing artists in, and property values rise, and gentrification can be a problem. This creative placemaking process, you take that on head on. I mean, that's the forefront, so while you're doing all these great things for the community, you're also very aware of this.
Right. Well, so when the whole sort of creative class philosophy came about with Richard Florida in the early 2000s, and basically artists were going to save cities and all economic tides were going to rise up together, there was definitely a process that happened where artists came in, the creative class came in, and it displaced people who were living in these communities, because artists would come in, sort of do the sweat equity, build things up, make it better, coffee shops, all the little usual suspects would pop up, and then people then sort of couldn't afford to live there anymore. So creative placemaking, there's been a little bit of criticism about it sort of contributing to the potential for gentrification, but more importantly, we're talking about creative placemaking in terms of creative place keeping, creative place enhancing. What are some of the other ones?
Well, yeah, because placekeeping and belonging is one of the themes of our conference, but it's also, this is an evolving field. And so I think people quickly recognize that was, the early criticisms happened, and people took those seriously. So, now we're looking at, I think, helping the community, I think focusing on the community being stronger so that they are intrinsically involved in the process, so that these communities more reflect the people that are already there. And so then when they might be welcoming people in, but people aren't necessarily wiping out the culture that's already there. Right. So there's just kind of more care taken.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so art is, again, a powerful way to communicate those messages.
Right.
Probably much more than a set of guidelines, let's say.
Yeah. I'm sure people watching are probably kind of wondering, well, what can we do in Albuquerque? Where are places that that creative placemaking could be applied or is being applied. You'd mentioned sawmill to me as a...
Yeah, so I just real quick throwback here to the International District and all of the effort that we went through with an NEA grant, specifically a creative placemaking initiative to identify a place where a community wanted to have sort of a little civic area, which quickly turned into like a place for an international type of market, and it all got sort of just beautifully tied right into what is going to soon be the new International District Library. So all of this creative work informed the overall use of the space of the library to go beyond just being a library. So that's a place where it has happened. We're also doing some work with a lot of stakeholders and artists through the little more traditional public art process in the sawmill area, looking at the very large retention basin and using that space with some artist infusion to make it a nice community space. So those are two in Albuquerque.
And you said you're from Murals, and that's a place that seems ripe for this type of process.
Right. Well, so we actually do on an ongoing basis. So for instance, we also have Working Classroom in our neighborhood, which is an incredible resource and an amazing organization. So, like for one example, HomeWise, which is a local nonprofit, had some funds for a mural. And so we connected them with Working Classroom, and then Working Classroom worked with the entire community to design a mural kind of based on the memories that people said they wanted to see it up on the wall. And then as a community, we painted the mural. Working Classroom brought us in, and we had a whole celebration one day, and everybody picked up the paintbrushes, and we got some direction.
Okay.
They had it kind of color by numbers for us. and then there was a celebration later. And so it's very much a mural that reflects our entire community. But it's an ongoing process for us.
And tying in with Murals and also a little bit more kind of towards the northern part of downtown, we're all very actively talking about sort of like the big creative placemaking project of the Albuquerque Rail Yards. And now that the city's taken that back, the planning process, there's a lot of acreage, there's a lot of moving parts. Creative placemaking is just one tool that both the city, the arts community, the neighborhood is definitely looking at and exploring how that can work. And again, that's going to be another component of our conference.
Good. Oh, good. Okay, great. Well, we've got just a few more minutes left. I want to get to the conference so people know what what the outcome of all this that we've been talking about is. Sherri, tell me about the conference that's coming up.
So basically, the National Consortium for Creative Placemaking, which has been based out of the East Coast, it's a education training school that teaches the principles of creative placemaking. They have begun putting on conferences, regional conferences, and they're calling them summits. So Albuquerque was selected to host the the Creative Placemaking Summit West,
yes,
which includes basically all of the mountain states, mountain region states, here in Albuquerque the second weekend of February 7th through 9th.
Okay, great. And who will be there and who should be there?
Take that one.
Artists, arts administrators, citizens who are in all of these different disciplines, the different fields of transportation, housing, economic development, lots of different multidisciplinary types of agencies and organizations, and just interested citizens. But
our local activists, nonprofits, really anybody that's interested in helping Albuquerque stay on this. I think on this path we're really all very connected and trying to work together to improve our city. I feel like we all know that we're at an important moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it includes people coming from Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Texas, and Wyoming, sort of like, again, Rocky Mountain region.
How is the process? We don't have a whole lot of time, but just briefly, how is the process going to work? How is the conference going to work? Are there meetings, events, what happens?
Yeah, so the main summit is Thursday, Friday, and Saturday morning, so the 7th through the 9th. But then everybody got very excited, and there's all these extra things that are happening. So one is Art Place America, which is a co-sponsor of the summit, is bringing their art exhibit, 10 Sectors and Solutions, which is all about these different creative placemaking projects that they funded. And so that's going to be hosted at UNM School of Architecture, and their exhibition committee is working with Art Place, so that's exciting. And then they'll be also screening a documentary about Bear's Ears by Angelo Bacca. And then he'll be having a conversation, and then we'll also be having an open house. And then,
we'll have sessions, lectures. We'll have local tours.
Right.
We'll have workshops, and then at the end.
And then we've got a post-summit trip that the conversation starts during the summit, but people are going up to Santa Fe overnight.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of activities happening there. Meow Wolf is going to be involved. We're very excited. And then also the mayor of Santa Fe and all the arts organizations in Santa Fe. It's going to be a really, I think, incredible trip.
And Santa Fe, as we know, is the ultimate example of placemaking. It was the city.
It is sort of the quintessential case study of what a long-term effort of creative placemaking is all about. Now, there's definitely some criticisms of who was involved, which voices were heard, but as a long-term sort of effort of artists being involved in creating a sense of place at sort of the most authentic level that they could at that time. Yeah, absolutely. And Chris Wilson, the author of The Myth of Santa Fe, who really sort of did an incredible study about that entire process, is part of the post-conference.
And what's interesting is they're going to be talking about where they're at now, because they're talking about their Midtown area, kind of the more modern Santa Fe. They have a local innovation corridor going in, and they're trying to decide what to do with that campus in Midtown too. So that's interesting. And then Forecast Public Art's doing something
yes,
earlier
we're
before.
actually, the City Public Art Program is partnering with Forecast Public Art to do a sort of public art training workshop the weekend before, so that artists who go through that workshop are sort of primed and ready to start thinking about creative placemaking. And that information will be up on our public art website very soon.
Okay, great. I want to ask you, we got to wrap up, but where can people find out more information about the conference?
So the conference itself is at their website, cpcommunities.org/west. That's for the Western Summit. But we will also have a link to all the information on the City of Albuquerque Public Art webpage, which is cabq.gov/publicart.
Great. Well, I want to thank my guests, Sherri Brueggemann and Cristina Rogers. I hope this thing is a smashing success.
Thank you.
I'll definitely come out and check it out.
I'm excited about it.
And thank you for joining us on Take Another Look, and we'll see you next time.